I come from Zoran land. I bring joy to this city where National Guardsmen prowl. Zoran Mamdani is a candidate we endorsed. We endorse at the nation. We endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016 and in 2020. And if you believe Bernie Sanders lost, I got something to tell you. He's changed the narrative, the political alignment, in the same way Henry Wallace did. Maybe even more so because he did it inside the Democratic Party, which is a different discussion. But Zoran yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, the day before, showed, and there's been joy in New York, the Knicks, the World Cup, and his governing as a socialist, democratic socialist. But when he sat in front of a camera and spoke about Netanyahu as a war criminal, said the city couldn't do anything he had explored, but the federal government could with the ICC. That is an alignment, that is a change in political force. And he's relevant today because we're going to talk about that vision thing. There are many agendas because everyone here understands it's not sufficient to defeat Trump, that we need our ideas, our bold ideas. And in that context, we have three terrific people. I wanted to pick up on three through lines very quickly, and it's very dangerous to say three. I remember Rick Perry, who forgot what the third was. The first through line is that the nation has been a collaborator and vice versa with IPS for more than 40 years, since its founding. John Kavanagh, I see Tope, and Chuck Collins, and Sarah Anderson, and Bob Borisage. We have done inequality issues, which won a Sidney Hillman Award. We did an alternative State of the Union in 2006 with the Progressive Caucus. So we are aligned, and we believe ideas and action. The other through line is that the nation founded in 1865, and you can feel 160 years old this afternoon in DC if you want, was founded on the through line is that there's no real democracy if you have military misadventures abroad. The Anti-Imperialist League was founded at the Nation. Mark Twain was one of those, and the editors of the Nation. And the other through line is, we were talking about Minnesota and the trifecta, and the local power, and there are people, mayors against nuclear weapons and against war. But the nation decided, and we're on the 15th, I believe, anniversary of Occupy, that what happened in Minneapolis last winter was something important. Citizens, people showed their solidarity, their community, electeds, but people in the streets protesting ICE. And the two good people who were killed brutally, we nominated Minneapolis for a Nobel Peace Prize. And I think that means something because and I'll stop, but it's the first time a municipality has been endorsed. And we're in touch with the Secretariat every week. And we continue to campaign with organizers. And if you want to learn more, go to thenation.com. But now I'm going to turn to this great panel. I'm going to start with Lindsay Owens from Groundwork, who has an important agenda taking on corporate abuse. Lindsay, in your forthcoming book, Gouged, you trace how corporate profiteering and monopoly power have led to price hikes across the economy, with mega corporations enjoying record-breaking profit margins while everyday consumers struggle to pay gas prices, groceries, diapers, prescription drugs. What's taking place behind the scenes in these corporate boardrooms? And more broadly, how do you assess the anti-monopoly, antitrust politics to take on these times?
Great. Good first question. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. I should just say quickly, I'm a huge fan of IPS's. I have been following their work so closely since I got to Washington in 2014. And that really hasn't been by accident. It's because everywhere I go, IPS is there. When I was in Senator Warren's office as a baby staffer, Sarah was in there helping me think through the latest CEO pay numbers. When I got over to the House side and the Progressive Caucus, John was over there helping to organize the work and make sure the new members were steeped in the progressive economics and progressive foreign policy of it all. So just a huge fan of IPS's and really happy to be here. Thanks for asking me about my book. I have a book coming out September 29th called Gouged. This book is really about the reinvention of the ripoff and the concomitant erosion of a fair price in this country. And I talk about this in terms of sort of a true crime motif in the beginning of the book. And obviously everyone knows you need means, motive, and opportunity to commit the perfect crime. And the motive is as old as dirt, right? It's corporate profits. There's not really anything very interesting there. The means, I think, is where it gets pretty interesting, and I talk about two different pieces. The first is, of course, consolidation. It is pretty hard to rip someone off if they can walk across the street and get the product at a lower price, right? So the backdrop for what I view as this sort of proliferation of gouging, of course, is consolidation in our economy. But I also think the reinvention of the ripoff really comes from new technologies for emptying your wallet. And here what I'm talking about is, price fixing is old, right? And people are still doing it the old-fashioned way. We have this great case in California where the attorney general there has uncovered a kind of old-school price-fixing ring with Amazon and Walmart and Levi's, where they're just emailing each other being like, hey, dude, you're pricing that too low. Let's get that price up, and we'll all benefit. But there are lots of new technologies that are being deployed in the service of ripping us off. We have algorithmic price fixing where, landlords across the country can use an app to align on pricing for rents. We have another lawsuit out of California a couple of weeks ago where Calibrate, a tech company, has been providing software where gas retailers can all input sales volume data and align on price. The lawsuit, class action lawsuit, alleges that it could be responsible for as much as 30 cents a gallon in additional costs. Just a really tremendous amount here. But I also talk about why I think this sort of reinvention of the ripoff is doing something different. And that is eroding what we once knew as fair pricing. And I think this really gets to why you feel like you're hearing about pricing and cost of living and affordability everywhere. It's not just that prices are high, it's that prices are unfair. And people feel like there's something going on behind the scenes that is different than it used to be. And they're right. Pricing is less predictable. There's high frequency dynamic pricing now. Even things like groceries are changing pricing more frequently than they used to. We now have surveillance pricing, this idea that companies are spying on you in order to overcharge you, trying to use data to better ascertain your individual willingness to pay, your individual ability to pay. All of those pieces. So to answer the second part of your question, I think antitrust and anti-monopoly work is really critical, but I think it's only one piece of the puzzle. The tech companies are also, deploying a whole host of technologies that are frankly doing things to pricing that should be illegal. And I think the shopping experience in the e-commerce world is just really different than it used to be in brick and mortar stores, and the law hasn't caught up. And so my organization has been really supportive of things like bans on surveillance pricing. We've actually seen 40 pieces of legislation in states and localities just in the last 6 months alone to ban surveillance pricing. Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey signed a ban on surveillance pricing today. There's another piece of legislation on Kathy Hochul's desk to ban surveillance pricing. So I think, anti-monopoly work is sort of necessary but not sufficient. I think there are a few other pieces here. And the last thing I'll leave you with, because I know IPS is always really interested in history and religion and foreign policy. When I think about the fair price in this country, it's a relatively modern invention. And for thousands of years, we haggled, right? And there wasn't a posted price. And, if I was wearing a nice dress, I probably got charged a little more. And if I had a little dirt on the salesman, I probably got charged a little less. And, it was actually the Quakers who said, hey, it's really not fair to charge people different prices. All men are created equal under God. All men should pay the same price at the checkout line. And they abandoned haggling and moved to a posted price. And then it was John Wanamaker in Philadelphia, a religious man himself, but businessman as well, who said, hey, I want people spending a lot of time in Wanamaker's department store, but when it's time for them to check out, I want that to happen fast, right? And so he eliminated haggling and invented the price tag. And I think, for about 150 years now, we've had transparent posted pricing. And recently, because of this reinvention of the ripoff, increasingly, prices are more opaque, prices are more volatile, prices are less predictable. And so I really think in addition to sort of the work we need to do to bring down prices, we also need to be thinking about restoring the fair price as well.
Lindsay, thank you for that riveting tour of the reinvention of the ripoff. I don't know who's going to surround you first, me or John, the whole history, the Quakers, the Wanamaker's, and the little dirt on the salesman. So, Shane, you have been doing a lot of traveling, listening to workers in CWA. Thinking of it as a nationwide listening project, the working families agenda that you're hearing from workers about, a lot of anger, a lot of feeling that Katie, I think from Hoosier Action, spoke about. Tell us what the issues that matter most to them.
Yeah. Working people are angry and they feel completely alienated and ignored. And what we have seen at CWA, there's sort of three areas that we've been engaged in CWA and in the labor movement around of just taking the time to listen to our members and working class folks. The first is internally at CWA. The second is deep work that we are doing along with 3 other unions in North Carolina, and then sort of some work that's being done by a number of state federations, AFL-CIO, state level. One of the things that we really fundamentally believe is because of this sense of alienation, the sense that no one is really looking out for them anymore, is that we want to take the time to make sure that the agenda policies, the contracts, the policy lists that we are taking into this election, that our members and working class feel like it was theirs. It's not policy experts who are telling them this is what they need in their lives. It's not politicians who are trying to sell them a bill of goods. It is what they believe their agenda is. And so, And so internally in CWA, one of the things that we realized last year was it was really critically important for us to repolarize our members. Everything internally had become a back and forth of Trump sucks, Trump is great, and everything framed around Trump. And we needed to repolarize our members on the issues that were important to them. And so what we did was we first did a baseline poll, scientific poll of our members late last year, and then spent 3 months in the spring of this year going out to the members and having conversations with them with a survey in workplaces, some canvassing, and then online through email and texting. And we collected almost 10,000 survey responses from our members across CWA, and most of those, the overwhelming majority, were from workplace conversations. And the top issues that came out of those conversations were number 1, healthcare. Number 2, job security. Number 3, increasing wages. Number 4, cost of living. And number 5, retirement security. Now, as I mentioned, we did the member polling. One thing has really stood out to us, both from the results of our member survey, of talking to the members directly, and from the polling, and that was that healthcare is now one of the number 1 issues for our members. We took a poll right after the 24 election of our members to what were the top issues for you in the election. Cost of living was number 1 in 24. Healthcare was in that mid-tier, lower mid-tier to the bottom tier of healthcare, of issues that were important to them for voting. It has skyrocketed now to number 1 in terms of the survey, member survey, and number 2 in our polling. And also in our polling, when the people who said cost of living was their number 1 issue, we went deeper of like, what is it about cost of living? Number 1 was grocery prices. Number 2 was healthcare. Here's what's really stood out to us. In that 1-year period, 12-month to 16-month period, we didn't have any big contract fights around healthcare. None of our members saw a direct out-of-pocket increase in healthcare costs. So, but it was an important reminder for us is our members live in their communities. Their family members are experiencing these pressures that they themselves may not be feeling because of their union contract healthcare, but they also are afraid that when that next round of bargaining comes up, they see what's happening to everyone else, that it's going to happen to them. The other thing that really stood out to us in terms of conversations that we've been having and in the polling is the issue of corruption, and that politicians are out to only serve themselves. And while that's always been sort of in the mix, it's never been at the level it was. To the point when we asked a series of questions of what issues that a candidate could take would be an important issue for you to consider voting for them. The number one issue was tied. It was two issues, tied at number one at 84%. Now we have about 37% of our membership who are Republicans. At 84%, the number one issue was tied with a candidate who takes a stand on banning corporate congressional stock trading. And number two was right there, just right under 84%, was getting big corporate money out of politics.
Interesting.
So it cut, and that cuts across partisanship. So that's what we're finding internally in CWA. We've developed, with that, we had our legislative political conference at the beginning of June, where we outlined a series of issue topics that cover a lot of those issues, and then we had some federal legislation that backs those up. But the other work that I just want to highlight quickly is the work that CWA is doing with three other unions, with UAW, the Painters Union, IUPAT, and Unite Here, and in North Carolina. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my siblings at Unite Here, who, Gwen Mills, phenomenal president at Unite Here. They have really doubled down on building a worker-led movement, and especially in North Carolina, where we've really focused. We did a summer canvas last summer as a test, where we went to a mix of our membership, joint membership of the four unions, and with community partners and their membership. And it was just a listening session. And the response was so overwhelming of the thank you for not coming to tell me who I should be voting for. Thank you for coming to just hear what my concerns are. So we're taking that work, we're starting a canvas this summer, the four unions, along with a lot of our community partners, to do this canvas across the state of North Carolina, to then around September, after Labor Day, to have a North Carolina working class agenda that we will demand that all candidates running for office in North Carolina have to get behind. Again, making it clear that it was led by the real people in there.
Thank you, Shane.
Yep.
Thank you. We haven't talked much about participatory democracy, but it sounds like the listening tour has been related to that. We'll come back and talk also about North Carolina. So Lindsay, we heard from Corey in the previous panel about some of the votes, the NDAA, the defense budget, and so you got an unprecedented defense budget size. You got Hegseth, I think, seeking $88 billion supplemental. You have a senseless war. In the same way Shane was talking about his people coming to see corruption more clearly, do you have a sense of people coming to see what National Priorities Project IPS has been doing for so long in terms of what the priorities are, the trade-offs? Is that breaking through more? And how does the climate, extreme weather issue play? Because my memory is, tell me I'm wrong, in 2020 the Pentagon issued a report, and it was on climate as a national security crisis. So you're basically, the priority toward more domestic needs is great, but also it's taking from a national security challenge dealing with the climate.
Yeah, so first of all, yes, so where we started early this year, if you remember back, one of the very first things that happened this year, I know I was coming back from holiday, probably a lot of people were, was the invasion of Venezuela. So we have that, and then very soon afterward, we had the president and his Defense Department request a $1.5 trillion military budget. This budget would be bigger than at the peak of World War II. So historic budget. And this year, we just crossed the 1 trillion line for the first time. So we're just piling on historic increase on top of historic increase. Now, the win that we've had recently was 46 senators voting no on a motion to proceed for the National Defense Authorization Act, which was the first step toward this $1.5 trillion budget. And this is a huge win, actually, because even though the fight is far from over, this is a piece of legislation that has been considered so must pass on a bipartisan basis that it has passed every year for the past 60 plus years on a bipartisan basis. So this is a huge departure. We have not seen something like this. And it does have a lot to do with the outrageousness of the ask. And yes, there is 1.5 trillion plus another Iran war package on top of that they're asking for. So what we've seen is pushback, which it's about time for. And part of the reason that we've seen that is because we have actually, coincidentally, at the same time, organized in a way that we haven't organized recently. And so we're part of the People Over Pentagon campaign, and the entire purpose of this campaign is to pull organizations and movements together around the idea that the Pentagon is taking money from human needs and taking money from programs that we should be funding. And so just also on the sort of level of spending, one of our calls is for cutting the Pentagon budget in half. That may sound extreme. That may sound...
I think it sounds moderate.
It's where in this room maybe it's moderate, but out there, once you step out on the street, it's extreme. But it's not, and the reason it's not is because the way this fight has gone for so long is that we call for $100 billion in cuts, and the budget goes up by $200 billion. It's always that way. And so at this point, we are at a point where the cuts need to be bigger to bring it back into a reasonable level. So if we brought it back to a $500 billion budget, we'd be at the point that we were at the turn of the century, before the 9/11 wars, before all of this. And we have a long history in this country of the defense budget the military budget going up, and then it should come down. We leave Afghanistan, for example. It should come down, but it doesn't. It just keeps going up. And so we need to break that cycle, and we need to take it back to a more reasonable point. So the big success that we've had recently was on account of, I think, 3 major factors, and then our organizing around those factors. And the first one is the budget trade-offs. The first one is all of the things that Shane and Lindsay talked about is, the affordability crisis, the price of gas going up, and people understand that that's because of the Iran war. It's the big bad bill, the Trump's bill that passed last year that poured money into the Pentagon at the same time that it cut Medicaid and SNAP benefits for people. And so there's this huge outrage around this. And there's a huge potential for change. So if we cut the Pentagon budget by $500 billion, we could relieve all of the medical debt in this country for $250 billion. We could relieve all the private student debt for $150 billion. And then if we compound that year after year of a smaller Pentagon budget, there's so much we could do. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is the Iran war and the opposition to that. That's been huge for making this difference. And thing number three is the threat to increase coordination with the Israeli military that was part of this bill. And so those things combined and the coalition that we were able to build around those things is what made this possible.
Let me ask a quick question. When you call it the fight against the Pentagon, and IPS does that in its report, we saw after 9/11 just a growth industry of private contractors. You have other forces besides the Pentagon. Also, it now seems that the AI companies, Palantir, for example, you have a new face of war. You're seeing it from Ukraine to Israel to Gaza. How does the organizing address that?
That's a great question. So first of all, the contractors are a huge part of it. The contractors get half of the Pentagon budget at baseline. If this $1.5 trillion budget went through, it would be more like 3/4 of the budget just based on where the money is going. So it's a huge issue, and I would love to see Lindsay write her next book on the price gouging by the Pentagon contractors.
It's failed audits forever, right?
I have a little bit. I have a discussion of right to repair and how the defense contractors don't let the military repair their own equipment so that they get even more money when the military has to pay them to service the equipment, to buy the parts and all of those things. And I compare the F-35, which 55% of F-35s are in service at any given point, to the McFlurry, which is something that McDonald's can't repair themselves.
Yeah. So this increases, a lot of it would go to the new tech contractors and the old ones, like right. Lockheed's not getting locked out. But I think there are multiple fronts. One is National Nurses United has a great campaign against Palantir. I don't know if they're in the room today, but shout out to National Nurses United, who Palantir gets 15% of their revenue from healthcare, and they have software that's used in hospitals. So the nurses don't like the software. That's it's bad software. And so they don't like it for their jobs. And so that's the in. And then they talk about, and did you know Palantir does this in Israel? And did you know? And did you know? And there's amazing popular education that they're doing, and they have a campaign. And then I think the data centers that came up earlier are another real front for this.
I'm worried the data centers are going to move to space, but that's a different. I wanted to ask you, Shane, the corruption issue. It's transpartisan, the corruption issue. On the other hand, Trump and family, it's unprecedented. There's no words really to convey adequately. Do you think that the corruption around the Trump family has led your members to think of corruption anew, ranking it as high as you suggest?
I think so, and I think it's more so than the Trump family because it gets into this cultish nature of the Trump voters, but it's the cabinet and the types of people in the cabinet that we've been able to point to as the sort of CEO bosses that they all hate.
Interesting.
And to reinforce that sort of level of self-dealing. And that's what's cutting across is that all of our members, even with our Republican members in the polling, that they want to see politicians prioritize the common good over themselves. And they believe that all politicians, I mean, the Republicans will throw at us repeatedly, well, Nancy Pelosi became a multimillionaire from stock trading, whatever. Yeah. But I do believe that at least the conversations that we get from our folks on the front lines in the workplaces is that even the Trump voters are like, he's surrounded himself by a bunch of these people. One thing that's worked really well for us at CWA in driving that narrative is the fact that under the Biden administration and the Build Back Better efforts is that we saw a significant, massive increase in broadband deployment. Something that we at CWA have been screaming about for years is the digital divide in this country, rural and urban digital divide. And that the only real solution long-term is fiber to the premise, fiber to the home. And and the Biden administration prioritized fiber over any other delivery method and prioritized high road jobs, not subcontractor jobs in terms of the granting. But what the gift that the Trump administration gave us in moving our more conservative members on that issue was they changed the rules, and Elon Musk and Starlink is treated just the same as any of the telecom providers building fiber to the home. And the most
and your members know this.
And our members know that if you want a good quality, long-term, lasting, high-speed internet connection to your home, you don't give the money to Starlink. You don't sign up to Starlink. You invest to build the fiber to the home.
Fascinating. Lindsay, how does this conversation relate to the price gouging? It's all, and the new technologies. You talked surveillance, but are the new technologies usable as protection, or are they more seen as enemies to the right of no price gouging?
Yeah, look, one of the things I talk about in the book is like, these technologies on their face like aren't problematic. It's the sort of way in which they're deployed and used. So, the same technology, that can be used to jack up the price of ice cream at the grocery store on a hot day because, now we have electronic shelf labels and, HQ can put weather into the algorithm quite easily and, make sure that you, make sure that they don't, lose any chance to charge you the maximum for any item. That same technology, electronic shelf labels, has been used in Europe to reduce food waste, right? By quickly discounting foods that are, past their sell-by date, right? The algorithms, the Department of Justice and the Biden administration, pursued RealPage, this real estate tech company that, built software that landlords were using to sort of fix the prices of rents. And the DOJ complaint, the Jonathan Cantor's team put together is really worth reading. I mean, it's technical and it's long, but it's really, really interesting. It's also very cinematic. I mean, there was an FBI raid of the developer in Atlanta. It's like, there's a lot going on there. But they built these algorithms that help landlords maximize the amount of rent they're able to charge for any given unit, for any given square footage, with any amenities, things like that. And And they've built in like a price floor, right? Because they want to make sure you don't get below a price. But of course, there's no price ceiling, right? That's a soft ceiling, it's called, right? That's something for landlords to push the envelope on and push through on rent prices. And so, yeah, like the underlying technology itself isn't necessarily, sort of a priori problematic on its own. It's of course how it's being deployed and the asymmetry with which it's being deployed, right? This idea of surveillance pricing, we're seeing it in the labor setting too. The same technology that can ascertain the exact maximum you're willing to pay for an item can also work to ascertain the very minimum someone's willing to accept for a shift of work, right? So it's really about the deployer, I think, rather than always the technology per se.
I just want to make sure the cohort of fellows knows questions are coming up. Question?
Okay, that works. Okay.
Forgive, I didn't see you over there in the corner.
No. Yeah, we're hiding a little.
Come out. Let's make a deal.
Well, first of all, I would really like to thank you for coming here and allowing us to have a very critical and productive conversation with you. Oh, yeah, a very productive and active conversation with you about this topic. First, to introduce ourselves, my name is Ramya. I'm on the Global Economy Program with Sarah Anderson.
My name is Aiden. I'm on the program on economic inequality and the common good with Omar Akambo.
So before we ask our question, I just really want to mention first how this particular discussion on advancing an agenda for all is very relevant to our cohort, especially as young people. Because as young people, we are currently experiencing the brunt of social safety cuts and the dread of the current world right now. And alongside this, we are also experiencing economic anxieties and cost of living pressures. We want to know how policymakers can take these individual battles of war, corporate abuse, and affordability, and how they can make that into one cohesive narrative that everyone can relate to, which brings us to our question that Aiden will ask.
That wasn't the question? The big question.
Our question is how people on the progressive left can take these at least somewhat separate issues and weave them into one cohesive economic narrative, and how we can pitch that economic narrative to voters who might be cynical or tired of politicians who say they're going to change everything and then don't actually end up doing that. So how can we weave these separate issues into one narrative, and how do we pitch that?
I open it up to who would like to take that small question.
I can start. I'll say two things. One is sort of a more, I think, analysis of the current sort of political climate, and then one is like a more direct answer to your question. So, like, sort of, something really interesting is actually happening right now from a political science perspective on the sort of politics of the economy. And that is that for the first time since the year 2000, Democrats are more trusted on the economy than Republicans. There have been like two little blips since the year 2000 where it flipped, and most recently there was a moment during the pandemic. But sort of outside of like major like economic crises, it's sort of been it's just sort of been true in most of modern history that Republicans have been stronger on the economy. And obviously that's like a pretty tough place for Democrats and progressives to be, because it's often like the number one issue for voters, right? So ceding it for like 26 years, like not great, right? But that's flipped, and depending on the poll, I think I saw a Fox News thing yesterday or today where like Democrats were like +7 on the economy, right? Like not even +2 or whatever. Now, obviously that is like primarily a story of like complete economic deterioration and economic mismanagement under the Trump administration, and a whole host of the policies he's pursued, almost all of which have been mentioned already. But even that isn't like enough to guarantee that Democrats would like defy gravity and like be ahead on the economy. And so I think like I want to answer this question in that context, because I actually view this moment where we're maybe headed into a midterm election where Democrats and progressives might have the gavel again in the House, where we're about to have an open contest for who should be the party's nominee. I think the like opportunity here is to sort of cement and press that advantage by offering like a new but resonant story about the economy, who it works for, and sort of why, what's standing in our way. And I'll just say one sentence, which is, for me, like, as a shorthand, that's economic populism, and the villain here is the corporations, it's the Palantir, it's the Starlink, it's all of the companies who are really short-circuiting the opportunity for Americans to forward their lives and to have a little breathing room.
That's very powerful. Thank you, Lindsay. I was going to say, though, on a broader front, I think IPS and the Nation and others in this room have agreed over the years it's not just the Republicans, it's the Democrats, and we're seeing an economic populism, a multiracial populism emerge, an insurgency that has led the establishment Democrats to go berserk. And I think also Democrats are perceived as more reliable, but the larger issue is, John and I were meeting with Mark Procan, we got a coffee, and John showed me a poll about how capitalism is imploding as a category. Now I'm not a democratic socialist. I work in an office with a lot of them. And we got a mayor, but it is the implosion of a model, and what you were speaking to so eloquently, that speaks to a younger cohort because of precarity, which is a big word. And we're seeing it in New York City with affordability emerging as the issue. And I think that has combined to bring cohesiveness of a sort to all of what we're talking about. Shane, I'm sorry, but...
I want to, Katrina, thank you for mentioning that piece about Democrats are just as much to blame as Republicans for a lot of this. And that leads me to really, to your question, I think we all need to be very honest with the communities and the people that we are fighting for, that whether your issue be economic justice, climate justice, you name any of the issues that we've all talked about or highlighted, whatever your agenda item 1A is, 1B has to be political system reform. I won't use the word democracy because it means too much to too many people, and a lot of people will say we need to go back to democracy. Well, the democracy we've been living under is what got us into this mess in the first place.
All power.
A system that, it's proven, we have more veto points in our system of government than any other Western quote-unquote democracy than any other democracy in the world, period. More opportunities for the corporate interests. And let's just be honest, the founding fathers were all about protecting what they have. They were all a bunch of moneyed elites trying to protect what they had. And that's the system that we've been working under. So the thing that unites all of this is we need to be honest, and the movement of the movements, in my mind, is political system reform.
And taking on corporate power.
Taking on corporate power. Have a political system that actually centers working people, real people's voices. And that means ending the two-party duopoly, moving to multi-party proportional representation.
Europe.
And these are all things that we also need to be honest that these are things that we have to do. And people are like, oh, but that's so hard, et cetera. I'll finish, Katrina. But we have to be honest, we can do it. Over the last 250 years, we have constantly moved towards that more perfect union, and we can do it.
I think the idea of organized people versus organized money is not going to last that long unless we take on what you're describing.
Exactly.
And it's so interesting your members thinking about corporate money. Lindsay, did you want to come through?
Yeah, I'll try to be really quick. So I'll just say, because of the nature of my work of, spend less on the Pentagon, spend more on good things, I think a lot about kind of two faces of government. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be productive, it can be destructive, but it can also just be unresponsive or responsive to the wrong things. And I think that's so much of what Lindsay and Shane are referring to, the corruption, the price gouging, corporate power, all of these things. And so if we want to save democracy, I think it has to be just as much about making democracy real for people and letting people feel it. And so I think that's part of the answer. And then, of course, I'm going to say to your question, well, we have to cut the Pentagon budget and spend it on the programs that can give people what they need. We do, and that's something that really resonates with people. And I think we've seen that kind of talk really taking off in the campaigns of the progressive Democrats who've been running this year and on social media and in so many places. So I think it's, I'm optimistic that it's starting to break through, but we've also seen it start to break through before and come back. So we have to keep pushing.
Lindsay, you're so right about the two faces of government. I mean, but in New York City, again, Zoran Mamdani took Reagan's infamous phrase, right? What's the most scary thing? Government's at your door, remember that? But he turned it around and said, the scariest thing is you've worked all day and you can't feed your family. I mean, just that's at the door. And I think the ability to reimagine and take on with some irreverence, but also with history, because the fight about the Pentagon budget has gone on for many, 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 many years. I think of Seymour Melman and the conversion plan, which was introduced in the Congress. I babble. One thing that is cohesive is that you're criminally young. So, all right.
Thank you so much for those very insightful answers. And yeah, I agree, we're very young. Before we pass the questions or the mic to audience, we do have a lot of online people who do have some questions, so I will take one question from online. Sarah Van Gelders asks, the military-industrial complex has installations in virtually all congressional districts. How do we combat the local support behind high defense spending?
Well, the idea that it's in every district, yeah, I mean, it's the budget in some parts of this country, but this is where the Melman conversion.
Yeah, so I want to hear Shane's answer to this, but in particular, actually, but I mean, for many people who are not directly employed in the military industry, I think it's understanding that the potential for economic power there isn't as big as it's made out to be. We have studies that show if you make the same investment in military industries versus in healthcare, education, infrastructure, clean energy, so many things, you can create more good jobs. So making that clear. But I think where it gets really hard is for communities and people who will be directly impacted by the loss of those jobs and the loss of that economic engine, which it is in some places. And so, part of that answer is there was a Pentagon program. It's not operational anymore. The Office of Economic Adjustment, and a prior IPS colleague worked her almost entire career on promoting that, Miriam Pemberton. And so, retraining programs and the example of, no, we're not making aircraft anymore, we're making ventilators. There are examples like that work. So, but it can't just be, you lost your job, you're out of luck.
Shane, did you want?
I mean, this is an interesting question. CWA represents a number of folks in the military-industrial complex who make weapons of war. But to the conversation that's brought up, they were the ones who said during the pandemic, let us stop making bombs and let us start making ventilators. And at the same time, too, it's like having a conversation of, do we want more people making bombs or do we want more hospitals in our communities? A lot of those congressional districts that have some part of the military-industrial complex may have recently lost one of their hospitals because of the cuts in the big ugly bill. So I think it's important for us to be organizing the people around. We need to shift those resources from making bombs to actually having hospitals or long-term care facilities.
Very powerful, the ventilator story. More questions from online?
Yeah, so I think what we're going to do right now is take 2 questions from the audience, and then we'll have you all answer them as a group, both questions. All right.
So you're well aware of the excellent work that the Heritage Foundation did to produce 2025. And I'm hoping that the Institute of Policy Studies is producing 2029 to guide the first year of the new administration. How about it?
Hear, hear.
All right.
The one thing I'd say is you need a movement president, someone who's going to pay heed to the think tank ideas.
Hi, my name is Ariana. I work with Climate Justice Alliance. I think a theme I've seen throughout the speakers today is all this excitement around uniting people on economic issues, which I agree with and am excited about. But something I'm also concerned about on the left, and I think was exemplified in the demise of the Graham-Plattner campaign, is how prioritizing economic issues can make us forget some important social justice issues, particularly because they've been so co-opted and villainized by the right. So I'm curious, how can we bring in those pieces to the economic angle? And yeah, just like really thinking about what one of the previous speakers said about like creating an agenda for white people to care about white supremacy, for men to care about dismantling patriarchy.
All right, I think now then we'll take answers for both those questions.
Thanks for another batch of really easy questions. I will say, you know, as to the first question on IPS doing a Project 2029, first of all, above my pay level, but I think there's a lot of discussion. Yeah, we have our paper. Please, again, read our paper that we put out for this event. That could be a blueprint for the Project 2029. There are a lot of, there's a lot of discussion of needing policy proposals and policy blueprints for 2029 in movement spaces, and I think we'll get there. We had a lot of those papers. We had a lot of those in 2020 and in 2024, and I think we'll have that piece. I think, harking back to our previous panel, it's not having the ideas. I mean, it is having the ideas, and we will be doing that part, but it is having the connection to the power to put those ideas into action, which is IPS's motto, funnily enough. And then on the second question, I would actually love to call up the first panel again, because I think that Kate and Erica and Curry would have so much to say about this, and probably better than I can. But obviously, we have to do it all. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and we have to have a movement and a space that is big enough for everybody and takes care of everybody. And that means that we can't leave behind women, and we can't leave behind Black people, and we can't leave behind immigrants, and we can't leave behind trans people, and all of it. So that's just non-negotiable, and it means we have to find ways to work together, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be bumpy.
Yeah, on that point, I just ditto to what Lindsay said. But I just want to go back to my point about whatever 1A is, 1B needs to be political system reform. We can't protect the communities we need to protect. We can't make progress on the issues we need to make progress on unless we've reformed our political system in this country. We won't be able to do that. And so that should be the one thing that unites all of the different movements together, is that we've got to fix our political system so we can protect those that need to be protected, make the advances that we need to make in this country. And on the other piece, I really feel like we are in a opportunity here of taking the great policy ideas that folks have had and go back to what I started with about, we have a window of opportunity over the next several years. The presidential election season is going to begin in November of 2026. And so why don't we take these ideas that we know are going to address the concerns of the people out there and use the next several years to hold listening sessions all across this country, in communities, in South Dakota, in Utah, and in the Bronx, and in LA. Just let's go out to the people and talk about these issues, and as progressives and as Democrats, talk about it, and also remind folks that we're not going to make progress on any of this until we fix our political system.
Thank you. One last round.
All right.
This is a question for Shane. When you did the survey of your members, when they talked about how they felt about politicians, usually when that question is asked, it's somebody else's politician, somebody else's. So when they answered that question, were they talking about their member of Congress? Were they talking about their 2 senators or somebody locally that they could vote for?
So I can't get into every conversation, but the sense that we've had from the folks that have engaged in the surveys and from the polling is it's sort of like they're disgusted with everybody at this point. They're disgusted with everybody.
I think we need one more question. Can't
Sorry, I
have that
couldn't
wait.
filibuster on that one.
Yeah, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello? Yeah, thanks. I'm Robert Beets. I'm from Wisconsin, so it's great to see Wisconsin and Minnesota represented here so faithfully. My question was, how can we use the upcoming intergenerational wealth transfer to promote solidarity and to advance an agenda for all?
I would love to have Chuck Collins. Unless someone up here really wants to. Chuck?
I think most of that wealth transfer is going to be in the upper canopy of the forest, you know. So it really is about solidarity with the top 1/10 of 1%. But I actually think that's that organizing work, patriotic millionaires, different groups are trying to do that. And Bella's going to speak to this in her slide.
How would you mark the anniversary of Occupy, Chuck? Because that became the 99 1%. All right, I'm sorry to.
How about another round of occupations?
No, more seriously, you would see another round? All right. There's a question in the front behind the good Mr. Scott Wallace.
Testing. Okay, goodness. Okay, Stephen Snyder. So my question is, I think it's wonderful to try to cut military budget, but it seems with the advances in technology, so much of this has become dual purpose now. I mean, data centers have a lot of military applications. AI has a lot of military applications. Even fiber optics. I mean, if half the stuff I've heard about 6G is correct, that's going to be huge for surveillance. So how do you separate things that are going to be used for legitimate civilian purposes from how it will be used for military purposes?
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with an answer that maybe isn't quite satisfying, but just by pointing out that the vast majority of military spending is not dual use, is not those things. And so there's a tremendous amount that can be cut without touching any of the dual use data centers, AI, any of those things. That said, there is these things, data centers, AI, do not need military funding for civilian purposes. I think many in this audience, and it's not my area of expertise, but probably have huge questions, right, about how much we need those for civilian purposes too, right? That's the data center fight that we talked about earlier. So I think, in terms of cutting the military budget, it's not a huge problem to solve. It is growing. It is, it's a growing portion of the budget, and so it's a growing problem to solve. But I think, one thing we need is some unrelated answers. We need things like some international law and treaties around military use of AI. We have nothing. There is nothing that addresses this. And it's desperately needed, and we need to move in that direction. And that would help to set some limits around what are the military uses, and therefore what is the military spending.
Thank you. I think this is this riveting discussion comes to an end. May it continue toward cohesive ideas and action for this next year and beyond. Thank you.